And like temperament seems to be the thing that blows the most people's minds. I mean, we get it, like adults all have different personalities, you're different from somebody else, but when you think of a baby, for some reason we think that they're all the same. Hello and welcome back to Developmental Psychology 101, where I take my old lectures and I translate them into things that you guys actually understand, or at least I hope so. So today we are picking up where we left off in my attachment lecture, which is also my temperament lecture, which, full disclosure, is not just my lecture. When you take over a course at a university, you take with you all of the information that has been like handed down before you, and you update it and you refine it. So this is a legacy of information that I didn't just put together, but other people did too. Sometimes you make brand new courses. This one was a course that's been around for a long time, so I redid it, added more information to it, and now that I'm reading it to you guys and explaining it to you, I am adding so much more new information because I've been in this space for so long now. Okay, and while we do that, I need to, one, I'm in my PJs because we don't have time, and two, I need to build some drawers for my daughter's room. So we are flat packing and lecturing at the same time because that's just who we are as people, and you should come to expect that of me by now. If you only watch me on YouTube, maybe not, but if you've watched me literally anywhere else, this is my life. This is what I do. I like to multitask. I've got my slides in front of me on my iPad, which I should probably set up, and we'll see how we go. So we left off last time talking about temperament, right? And like temperament seems to be the thing that blows the most people's minds. I mean, we get it, like adults all have different personalities, you're different from somebody else, but when you think of a baby, for some reason we think that they're all the same, that they should all do X, Y, and Z at a certain age, in a certain way. Like if your child's not sleeping through the night, it's therefore your fault, not the baby's fault. It's not really the baby's fault, it's their temperament. So temperament is this really, for some reason, surprising thing, but if you think of it in terms of personality instead, when you try to draw like comparisons between adults and children, it makes a little bit more sense. And so some of the early like theories of temperament stress the effects of our emotions or level of arousal, and like that's how our actions were driven by them. Our actions were driven by our emotions or our level of arousal, but we now know a bit more about it. So newer theories, and this about like 2004, Rothbard is a good one for this kind of reference. They, like those kinds of theories, emphasize effortful control. Now effortful control is self-regulation, essentially. And if you've been kicking around on like the gentle parenting, the whole brain child, the anything like that lately on social media, in the internet in general, or even the books, you know that self-regulation is a skill managed by the prefrontal cortex, so that front part of your brain. And the front part of your brain is one of the slowest to develop. So it does develop from birth, as all do. That's, I mean, it's a brain. They do that. They develop from the moment they start growing from like single cells, whatever it is. But it doesn't mature until you're 25. And so if you think about what a mature part of your brain looks like, then you understand that if you're 25, when you finally get like good self-regulation skills, what is a brand new baby? What does a 6-month-old, a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old look like in terms of their self-regulation? Then add on the fact that some children just have innately more efficient control or self-regulation than other children do. So this effortful control says that individuals can engage in a more cognitive, flexible approach to stressful circumstances. And when you're a baby, literally everything is stressful. All right, we are doing a flat pack. Perhaps I should have done the first one so I could just do this while talking, because I don't necessarily know if I can do this while talking, but we are going to try. We shall try. Okay, so where's our next slide? So if effortful control, self-regulation is like attentional focusing and shifting. So where do you focus? Where do you shift your attention? It's inhibitory control. So how do you inhibit your actions to stop something that you're doing? Your perceptual sensitivity. How overwhelmed are you by your perceptions, by the world around you? And do you have low intensity pleasure or high intensity pleasure? How do you experience emotions? Are they really intense or just a little bit? If that all comes into effortful control and self-regulation, then what you see is that infants who are high on effortful control, they show an ability to keep their arousal from getting too high, and then they have strategies to like soothe themselves. So that's these babies that we would call self-soothers, right? Like that's the self-soothing baby. Because remember, just because someone tells you that you need to teach your child to self-soothe, that's not true. The research that designed that term is this temperament research, which identifies that there are children who innately will self-soothe and children who innately will not. There's self-soothers and there's signalers, and that's what we're talking about here. So children low on effortful control are often are often unable to control their arousal. They become easily agitated and intensely emotional. And I don't know about you, but I have a child who is low on effortful control, so she goes from 0 to 100 instantly, and she's done that since birth. Since birth, she just goes 0 to 100, freaking out. It's mental. And it's really hard to parent a child like that. These do not want to go in easily. Like that is the right hole. It is really hard to parent a child like that, but knowing that there are these innate differences in children should tell you something about the way that we need to raise them, right? There we go. Okay, this is where I broke in my last lecture. We have like gaps in between lectures. I made them like smaller lectures because I did these online. So we had like, instead of doing 2 hours straight of lecturing, we would have like a bit of a gap, and like have like 6 mini lectures or something instead for a week. I know it's a lot of content. But what are we up to next? Emotion. Okay. Interesting. Okay, so this is all about expressions and emotion. This is really fun stuff to talk about. So we're leaving temperament there and attachment there, and we're kind of moving on now to emotion. So what is an emotion? Everyone knows what an emotion is until asked to give a definition, because emotion is something that you feel, something that you experience, but then when you go to define it, it's pretty dang hard, right? So an emotion is a feeling or affect that occurs when people are in a state of interaction that is important to them, especially one that influences their well-being. So emotion is uniquely individual. Just because something might not feel emotional to you does not mean that it's not emotional to somebody else. And that's kind of really important to remember for our little humans, because just because why has this got so many holes? Is this the right one? Yes, it's the right one. Why is there a third hole? Sorry, crew, still trying to figure out what is going on here. Like this. Yeah, just because you think that there's something that they shouldn't be upset about, yet they are, and you're like, stop that, don't be silly, doesn't mean that they're not feeling quite an intense emotion about it. Something that feels fine to you feels hard to them, because emotion is uniquely described as being something that a human experiences on their individual level. Add in the temperament stuff, and one's unique ability for effortful control or self-regulation, and all of a sudden, very different people have very different experiences of the same context scenario, and then it's even worse for little children. Okay, so what makes an emotion? There are expressions, things like smiles, frowns, clenched teeth, you know, that kind of stuff. There's physiological, so that's physical feelings, so things like sweat, tear production, heart rate. So, you know, when you get anxious, your heart starts to beat faster and harder. There are coping behaviors, so running away, seeking comfort, running away is something that kids do when they are like furious or upset or something, and they'll run, or they're scared, they run away from something. Seeking comfort's that idea of attachment. They come and find comfort because they're upset. And cognitions. And cognitions just means thoughts. Why we use the word cognitions when we could just use thoughts, I don't know. But cognitions are things like, I have been insulted. Like, I have a thought that I've been insulted. Even if the person didn't intend to insult you, you think that they've insulted you, and that gives you emotions. All right, I haven't read these slides in a really long time. So a child's emotional responses can't be separated from the situations in which they are invoked. Emotions are relational rather than strictly internal reflexive phenomena. So an emotion is kind of like attachment. It's not like it's just internal to the one person. It's a response to the outside world. It's a response to the environment. Those two things can't be separated. So let's use taking a toy as an example. If you take a toy off a child, the emotion is sadness, frustration, anger, because the toy's been taken off them. It's tied to the context. And although feelings are internal, the causes are external. So it's not reflexive. If you're insulted, you have to consider it for a while first. So it's not immediate all of a sudden. Like, if you've been insulted, you're like, hey, wait, what? It's not just like someone says something, you're just like, rah! Sometimes it's like someone said something, you sat with it, you thought about it, which is why kids come back later and they're upset. Adults too. I mean, everybody has these emotions. What else do we have? Do infants care about expressions? So yes, infants do care about expressions, and a really good experiment to illustrate that is the still face experiment. So this is a particularly heartstring kind of tugging experiment, because essentially babies are really attuned to their mother's faces, right? Like, when they are in utero, they are shown like light patterns. So there's this one study they did where in utero you were shown light patterns. Ugh. Sorry, I'm trying to get this. I can't get them. I give up. In utero, they're shown like arrays of light. So in the belly, when they're not even born yet, they're shown these arrays of light, and the light is either reflected in like a random pattern or the shape of something else, or it's in the shape of a face. And infants attend to faces in utero. As fetuses, before they're born, they have a preference of faces. I don't know what point in pregnancy this is, but I think it's like surprisingly like early. Not that early, like it would be post 20 weeks, but yeah, they do attend to faces. They really care about faces because they're humans, and it's an innate human preference to be social. So they care about faces. Do they care about emotion expressions? Yes, because what they did in the still face procedure is that mum would just like interact with their baby and like chat normally, and then they would instantly go like this. They'd be like, hey baby, how you doing? And they would keep that deadpan face for ages, and they'd see what the babies did to like try and re-engage attention, to try and make it better. And babies get distressed, they get upset, they try to re-engage attention, they care about their parents' expressions. So if a parent holds a neutral face for 1 minute, they intensely care about changing it most of the time. I usually have a video of it, but I'm not editing that in, so you can Google still face paradigm and you'll see it. So normally babies gaze at parents for about 70% of the time and smile 20% of the time. Like, just generally, like your baby will gaze at you 70% of the time, smile 20% of the time. During a still face procedure, babies stop smiling and their gazing drops to about 50% because they're uncomfortable. Infants are sensitive to others' expressions, especially during interactions. So yeah, they find it really aversive. Some babies will look away and arch their back. They'll try to re-establish contact. It's not a fun time. It's a really sad experiment. All right, how long are we recording for? 14 minutes. All right, we're going to stop this at 20 minutes and then we'll just do the rest of the lecture next week. So can children use emotional expressions, or just physical expressions, I should say? So by 12 months, infants are beginning to use others' emotional expressions to guide their own behavior in ambiguous situations. So my favorite one of this, like my favorite example of this, is the visual cliff paradigm. So in the visual cliff paradigm, again, go and Google it, the social referencing visual cliff paradigm, because I'm not editing the video in. But in this paradigm, essentially you have this like weird apparatus, this weird thing. It's a big platform and you pop the baby on top of it. And so it's got this like checkered floor that the baby can crawl across. And then it has this like illusion. So like there's a false floor. So there's a second floor with the checkered floor on it. That's quite a drop. So you have the baby's like standing on this bit here, and then all of a sudden it looks like it drops, and then here's the rest of the floor here. But what they don't know is that there's actually, where the floor like line keeps going, there's actually a perspex top. So there is a perspex floor. So it looks like there's no floor, but there is. It's just see-through, like think glass if you don't know what perspex is. It's just see-through plastic kind of stuff. And so if babies kept crawling, they would be fine because there's not actually a drop. It's just it's an illusion. It's a false visual cliff. But when babies approach it, what they wanted to do was see if babies would, one, socially reference their parents at the other end of the cliff, and if their parents' emotional expressions would alter that baby's behavior. So parents were told to either smile to say, yeah, you can keep going, like not saying any words, just smile, like this is a good thing, or to show a negative expression, I think. Yeah, so a negative one would be fear, anger, or sadness. So this experiment, and I think it's from Source 1985, so ages ago, but like it's still the coolest experiment. It's so much fun. 115 infants watched from the shallow side of the cliff as their mother placed a tempting toy at the deep end of the cliff. Remember, it's a visual cliff, so it's not actually a deep end. When children went to cross, parents would either show a positive facial expression or a negative one. So they did 12 months because this is around the age that infants start to walk, so they had to have experience with falling. So they had to know that falling was an aversive thing, otherwise this experiment just wouldn't work. So what they found was that when mothers showed a positive expression, infants would, 74% of the time, continue crossing. They would walk onto the perspex because they looked at their parents, they thought, oh, this is safe, and they walked along across. And like, that's awesome, that's what we want to see. They're referencing their parents' expressions as a form of communication to figure out if it's safe or not. So they're looking at you and your emotional expressions constantly to figure out if something is good or bad for them, because you are their protector, their everything. Now, that means 26% of kids still didn't cross. And then when you look at negative expressions, they're even more effective. So 85% of children did not cross when their parents had a negative expression. They were like, oh, this mustn't be a good thing. We've looked at mum, she's angry, therefore it's not a good thing. And then 15% still crossed. Now, they don't always look for a signal. So while the overwhelming majority do, about 20% of kids just didn't look for their signal at all. They either would cross or wouldn't, and wouldn't reference their parents. Whether this ties into trust and attachment and temperament, like yes, absolutely. There's a bunch of things that they didn't measure, so we don't know how they influence it. I'm sure future studies did this, but this is not my field of research, so I haven't gone to look it up again. But yeah, so babies can and do use emotional signals to guide their behavior. And the really interesting thing is, despite the fact that there were like 3 different negative faces, so anger, sadness, and fear, they were all treated equivalently. And that's because, and we'll probably talk about this in next week's lecture because there's just not enough time to talk about it today, but that's because children's ability to distinguish different emotions actually develops over time. They aren't just instantaneously born and able to distinguish between every kind of emotion. They start being able to distinguish between positive and negative emotions, and then they'll start distinguishing between different emotions within category as well. So we'll talk about that next lecture, and I'll tell you at what age children start to distinguish between different emotions, and what that really means for like raising kids and how they understand us and our expressions and stuff. But for now, what we've learned from this lecture is that one, self-regulation and ethical control can vary even at the same age and for the same context. So different children will respond to the same situation in very different ways, and it's not your fault if they're not self-soothing themselves. It could just be that they are low in effortful control and self-regulation. We know that children care about emotional expressions, that they will look to their caregivers most of the time in like perceived danger, and that they expect social interaction from faces and expressions, and if they don't get it, if it's neutral, they find it quite aversive. So those are some fun things for you to learn about today in our Developmental Psychology 101 lectures. I'll catch you in the next one where we talk about the development of emotion and understanding of emotion in children. Catch you next week. Bye!